again by Benning. Darnell Nurse left it in the corner, gets up center. Perry scores! Corey Perry!
Ilya able to shake away from Solani. It's given away to Solani around in front. Score! Teemu Solani with the steal.
Three in the face, 1-1. Score! Off the floor! On the board! Paul Kariya!
All right, we are back for another episode of the Forever Mighty podcast after a Ducks win against the Colorado Avalanche. I don't think if you had told me before this two-game set that the Ducks would come out of two games against one of the best teams in the NHL, that they would get 3 points out of it and keep both of these games close. A 3-2 overtime loss, which we all thought they probably could have gotten 2 points out of and deserved it. And then a hard-fought 3-1 win tonight, led by John Gibson. I mean, he was exceptional in both games, but on a whole nother level in this one.
Yeah, I think Gibby played pretty incredible this game, and I think, seeing the shot numbers balance out a little bit more in this game in the way that we would expect, I think that kind of explains why Gibson played so well. I don't think they really played well enough in front of him to even limit some of the chances. I think they had stretches where they were able to keep him to the outside and stuff like that. But I think overall they really leaned on Gibson this one more than they have in a few other games.
This is what it's going to be like for most of the season. I mean, we've talked about it. We talked about it in our season preview and over the course of the first few games here, and pretty much every one of John Gibson's starts. If the Ducks are going to win games, it's going to be, essentially this game is 2-1. It's an empty net goal by Hampus Lindholm that makes it 3-1. The Ducks are going to have to win these close 1-goal, 2-goal games backed by an exceptional performance from John Gibson. That's how they're likely going to win most of their games this season. There'll be the odd few here and there that they, put through an exceptional offensive performance and win by a couple goals, but that's going to be few and far between. We talked about the Ducks being one of those three teams who could really fight for that fourth spot and creep into the playoffs, and this is how they're going to do it. And, the big thing, I think, the big takeaway from this game here and really the start of the season is that John Gibson, again, he's the key, and he's back. We've been a little worried about the Ducks just being completely awful in front of him and how that's going to impact him and how it impacted him last season. And you look at his stone cold post-game interview where the guy shows no emotion whatsoever after just pitching a 32 save performance against one of the most high-powered offenses in the league. Like, he's in the zone completely.
Yeah, no, he made that save towards the end of the game where he went all the way across and he kind of used his legs to get over, and that's the kind of save he makes 2 years ago, and we're all freaking out because he's still kind of got the lingering ghost of hip issues and that kind of stuff, or hamstring issues, all that stuff. He looks really good. There was that clip of him. There was like a close-up shot of him after Rantanen had that backhand go right into his chest or his glove, and you can hear Rantanen swear on the broadcast, and then they cut to Gibby after, and Gibby's just laughing. You know what I mean? And I think that for me is the stuff that you want to see from him. Like, he's, I think he's kind of a cheeky guy as far as, sometimes he'll give you a little bit extra, but the stuff as far as body language that you really want to see from him is when he really looks to be having fun. And tonight on his face, you could see he was enjoying himself. So that was nice to see.
Yeah, and it's tough to enjoy yourself when you get outshot 33-14. But when you're playing the way that John Gibson is, and he's got the support from his teammates, of course. You look at Lindholm scores the empty netter. The first person he goes to is John Gibson to be like, yeah, that one. The broadcast basically said, hey, he went to him and said, that one's for you, because of he kept the Ducks in this one. And we'll get to the numerous amount of saves that John Gibson made in this one, but we start off with the pregame here, exact same lineup from the last game against Colorado. Really no surprise there. Couldn't really see any changes. Milano's on the IR. There's not really too many guys who could check in. I think, Fowler and Hakanpää have looked good, so Hakanpää, for at least the time being, has secured his spot in the lineup. And, Larson and Welinski, I'm not going to say they've been great, but I'm also not going to say they've been bad. So I don't think they really deserve to slot out there. It looks like Mahura and Backus were the extras in this game because they were scratched. The one downer there is I would have loved to see Mahura play if he was on the roster and had the ability to check in tonight. But again, I mean, you look at that performance they put in the first game against Colorado. Why change anything, right? They put in a shift. Everybody played a pretty good game in that first one, and they ended up picking out a point. So again, not super surprising that they come into this one with the exact same lineup.
Yeah, I think tonight was a little bit more indicative of kind of what you expect to see from a Larson-Welinski pairing where, a few times you got to see them, use their body and kind of clear guys out of the way or, stand guys up at the blue line. There are a couple of misplays. Larson held onto the puck too long and, led to that shot on goal. And I think, I think Mahura definitely has more upside than Larson does. And so I think there's definitely something to try to mix them in. But like you said, they played well enough last game to earn the right to lose the spot. You know what I mean? And so, I think if you're the Ducks, you're looking at, you're like, yeah, that's probably closer to what we're going to get from them in more nights. Again, Fowler and Hakanpää look good. Fowler had that play where he took himself off sides. Or no, that might have been Lindholm. But yeah, no, you know what I mean? I think overall everybody kind of played where you expect them to. I think, once again, you can see that Lindholm is the best defenseman on the team by a good amount. And, that trip penalty by Shattenkirk is maybe a little, but yeah, as far as the lineup, I don't think there's anything to change. So
yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for me is Yanni Hakanpää has been so good with Cam Fowler. The thing is, we just haven't seen a big enough sample size for him yet to know if it's for real, right? It very much could be because this is a guy who originally got drafted by the St. Louis Blues, didn't really cut it in the NHL, went back to Finland, played there for 3 or 4 years, and finally made his way back to the NHL. Is this guy a top 4 defenseman? It's way, way too early to say, but I don't think it's out of the question because if he gels with Cam Fowler and that pairing becomes a reliable pairing for the Ducks, which it looks like it has over 3 or 4 games now, Josh Manson doesn't easily check back in there just because he's Josh Manson in the name value and the amount of money he makes. We talked about this on the last podcast after the Colorado game a couple days ago. If they continue to look good, he's earned that spot in the top 4, and it's up to Josh Manson at that point to work his way back in. And I don't think Kevin Shattenkirk at any point is really going to fall off that top pairing with Hampus Lindholm. Yeah, he's had a couple bad games. He struggled with penalties in the last 2, but they brought him in to play with Hampus Lindholm, and they have looked good together at times, especially early on in the first few games of this year. So, for Josh Manson at this point, obviously he's watching this and I'm sure he's excited for the team and happy that they're doing well. But, his time when he comes back seems like he's going to start on the third pairing, whether that's with Mahura or Larson or, Welinski or whoever it is. He's going to have to work his way back onto that pairing with Cam Fowler if he wants to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I almost think, when he comes back, once he's kind of worked his way back into game shape and stuff, because, he's going to be out for 6 weeks. That's not a short amount of time. I almost wonder if it's kind of a 2-second pair thing and, they maybe try to put somebody else with Manson, like a Mahura, to maybe try to, juice the offense on all the lines. I think Hakanpää, if this is for real and he's playing right now at kind of what we can expect for at least the rest of the year, then I think that's a huge boost for Anaheim. I think that gives you another body on the penalty kill. That gives you someone who's willing to block shots, and it's a bigger guy. He can move some people around. But I also think it helps separate Manson and Fowler. And I kind of know I've been harping on this a little bit, but I think they're a bad pair. And I think if you can separate them, it's going to help both of them play better. And I think it's going to improve the quality of the defense overall. So maybe if you're Josh Manson, seeing Hakanpää play so well isn't necessarily the most comforting thing. But if you're Dallas Eakins, I think seeing him play well and the prospect of then getting back Manson into that top six, because I think Walensky's the easy one to take out, and the question becomes how do the minutes get divvied up at that point. So I think it's a positive overall, and I think it definitely bodes well for maybe the Ducks getting back to being a little bit better on defense like we maybe expected them to be.
Yeah, it's been a while since the Ducks could rely on, three pairings on the blue line to be solid. We've at times had, a top four that's looked pretty well and gelled well together on and off throughout a season. I think if you can have Lindholm and Shattenkirk be pretty good almost every night, if you can get Fowler and Hakanpää playing at a level that they're playing at now on a consistent basis, you then have options. Josh Manson is going to be in the lineup. He's going to be, the fifth defenseman, if you want to call it that. From there, I think Larson probably gets first shot just because, he's played pretty much every game this year and he seems to have the inside track on that bottom pairing. But, if things don't go well with Larson and Manson, you have Mahura and Manson, which I think could be an interesting pairing. And you also have Cody Curran, who hasn't played a game yet, whose skill set is a little bit similar to Cam Fowler's in terms of him wanting to get up the ice and his skating ability. And he's a little bit more offensive-minded than, say, Jacob Larson is. So you have a few different options. You've got a more defensive left-shot defenseman in Jacob Larson. You've got kind of the two-way guy in Josh Mahura and the more offensive-minded guy in Cody Curran. So once Josh Manson does come back, the Ducks do have some options if Hakanpää or Fowler are playing well together still. Let's break into the first period here. The Ducks got on the board early, and it's nice to see Jakob Silfverberg get one. We joked early on in the season, Comtois had 100% of the Ducks goals for a while there, and then at one point it was Comtois and Delorier who had 100% of the Ducks goals, and it was all coming from the bottom six, and I think Cam Fowler chipped in with the odd one. But, Jakob Silfverberg getting on the board here, it just kind of bounces right to him, and, we know that shot is there, right? And, he ends up firing it past Grubauer for the Ducks' 1-0 lead.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly the goal that the Ducks are going to need to win games this year, frankly. Like, they're just, we've talked about it ad nauseum at this point, but they don't have the high-end skill all the way top to bottom in the lineup to just go out and score beautiful goals the whole time. They're going to have to get weird stuff like that. They're going to have to get, deflections off of the defense and, lucky breaks and things like that. And that's a perfect example of that. He doesn't overthink it. He sees it popping and he just goes for it. And he puts it past Grubauer. And, I don't know that there's really a lot Grubauer can do in that situation. It's just kind of a great shot. And, yeah, like you said, we know he's definitely got the ability to get good shots away, and he can definitely pick his corners, as we've seen in the past. So, for me, that was a huge goal to see just because, one, it does get the monkey off Silfverberg's back a little bit. But I think the other thing is that's the type of thing that they're going to need to do in order to be, consistently in these games.
Yeah.
And I think that can make the difference. Sorry. I just think that can, that's the kind of goal that makes a difference against, maybe a Kings team or a Sharks team, right? Where it's just kind of a crap fest. And then when you're playing a high-end team like this, that maybe gives you a little bit of it gives you a little bit of extra pep in your step. So
yeah, and I think the good thing, we know kind of how Jakob Silfverberg gets going is he's fairly streaky, but this could be the start of things because usually once he gets the monkey off his back, like you said, he tends to go hot for a few games here, and obviously that would be great for the Ducks right now because they need offense from their top six. Their two regulation goals, or their two goals that weren't empty, an empty net goal by Lindholm, were from the top six, from the two top lines. You had Silfverberg getting one, and then later on you have Raquel getting one from Getzlaf. that's what the Ducks need, is those top two lines to get going. And then every now and then you can get the third line with the kids chipping in and the fourth line chipping in, which we know they will. But one of these lines, if not both of them, need to get hot if the Ducks are going to get results here. And, you look at the rest of this first period here, it was, the Ducks' goal was pretty much most, if not their only chance in this first period. McKinnon ends up wiring one off the post. Another big save by John Gibson off a Burakovsky one-timer. Makar hits the crossbar, had a wide-open net. And then later on in the period, he brings another one off the crossbar. It bounces right down to the line, and John Gibson covers it. Eerily similar to the Wild game where Kaprizov and I can't remember who else hit the post in the first period, but the Ducks were holding on in that one. I mean, John Gibson has been great, and don't get me wrong here, but man, the Avalanche have to feel hard done by in that first period, hitting 3 posts, and Makar is literally coming inches away from going in. You got to be good to be lucky, but sometimes you also got to be lucky to be good in John Gibson's case.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think if you're the Colorado Avalanche, I think you're kind of leaving that game going, look, we generated high quality opportunities. We got good shots on net. We had a goalie who was playing at, about as good as he could play, make some really big saves. And on top of that, we got a little bad puck luck with some bounces. There's the one shot, I think it's second or third period, but it goes through his legs and shoots out the other side, right? Like some nights that just goes straight into the back of the net. And so I think, Colorado can't feel too bad about it because Gibby played as great a game as he was going to play, and they still had more than enough chances to score 4 or 5 goals. So, like you said, getting some goals out of the top 6 was nice, but overall they really kind of got shut in their own end, especially in that first period. I think it was at one point like 12-4 in shots or something like that, and it was not good.
Yeah, it finishes 13-7 Avs in the first period. The interesting thing for me is the coaching decision by Dallas Eakins to put the Derek Grant line and match them up against the Nathan McKinnon line, and there was a lot of kind of arguments going on Twitter and in our chat to kind of start the show tonight, and if that was a good decision or not and if Derek Grant was kind of playing well and matching up well against Nathan McKinnon. I think you look at the fact that line for the Avs hit the post 3 times in the first period, and you look at the underlying numbers, Derek Grant was getting caved in, but the big thing is they didn't get on the board. And I think when you look across the entire game, it is an interesting decision. It is a bit of a confusing one because it's usually Adam Henrique or Ryan Getzlaf who's been tasked with shutting down an opposing team's top line, especially one as deadly as Nathan McKinnon and Mikko Rantanen are. But, what do you make of that decision? That's an interesting one for me for Dallas Eakins to put them out there.
Yeah, I think, Felix Sicard made this point on Twitter tonight where he said, playing Grant as a hard match against the McKinnon line, like it definitely leads to a situation where arguably the Ducks' worst players are out there against, one of the best lines in hockey. But the other thing that it does is it sets up the other lines to maybe have a chance to be a little bit more productive going against lesser talent. It's almost like you're just going to sacrifice that line because whoever goes out there is going to get eaten alive. And so if maybe you can see because I kind of felt whenever they were out there, I also saw Lindholm and Shattenkirk. And so I felt like that was kind of covering the bases there a little bit and trying to insulate them. And then, hoping that the other guys make the most of the opportunities that they can. It's certainly high risk, high reward. And tonight it paid off. But I think, like you said, it pays off because Gibby was good and they hit more posts than they're probably going to on most nights. So I'm not 100% sure that's something that the Ducks want to rely on. But it worked out well enough for them tonight. So I guess that's kind of all you're looking at.
Yeah. And, maybe it's not the decision by Eakins that we see in every game where Derek Grant is now, the go-to shutdown guy for Dallas Eakins. It's not the worst thing in the world. I think he is a great player, and I think he plays an important role for the Ducks. I'm just not sure on a nightly basis against every team's top line you want to make that decision and have Grant, Rowney, and Delorier playing against them. I mean, on paper, that looks like a huge mismatch, and it really is. I mean, the speed of Nathan McKinnon, I'm not sure you want Deloria and Rowney to have to deal with that, especially then you add Mikko Rantanen into that line. And I know Burakovsky's been skating there, but Landeskog made a couple of appearances on that line where it was the kind of old school trio for the Avs. So, we'll see where they go in the next game here and if Derek Grant gets those matchups. But, hey, you got to give Dallas Eakins credit. It worked for him tonight. So that's kind of the main point there. Heading into the second period, John Gibson, of course, opens the period with another great save on Devin Taves' one-timer. I mean, he was just the amount of the amount of ridiculous saves. I mean, John Gibson makes these saves look easier than they really are just because of his positioning and his ability to read the play. There was a couple saves he kind of dove across and robbed McKinnon at one point. This one timer on Devin Taves, like there's saves that a normal netminder would be diving across the net to make that save, and tonight John Gibson's positioning was just on point.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I think. Sorry, I was just kind of thinking about the Delorier thing, and I think part of that also is that line's really the only line the Ducks have left with any size.
Yeah, pretty
and I wonder
much.
if that was part of it. But no, yeah, that Devin Taves, the broadcast in Anaheim mentioned it a bunch of times tonight that what the Ducks were really trying to do was cut out those cross ice passes, and you see exactly with Devin Taves, who's not even really an offensive guy. He gets a great shot off, and Gibby's just in position by the time the puck gets to him. And, that's just a sign of how well he's playing and how well he's reading the game. And I guess if anybody's going to take that shot, you're kind of hoping it's Taves over Makar, but I don't know that that's really something you're excited about giving up. And, yeah, no, I think that was just kind of my thing,
Yeah, it's it's just one of those things where I think John Gibson was on his game in this one, and that's like we've already said multiple times in the show so far already that that's one of the reasons the Ducks held on here. But I think they took advantage of their opportunities, and you look at obviously Silfverberg cashing in on really one of maybe two high quality chances the Ducks had in the first period, and then you look in the second, their main opportunity in the second period they cashed in on it, and of course it's Ryan Getzlaf making things happen. I think I saw somebody tweet out like a Hall of Fame type pass, which is what we're used to seeing from Ryan Getzlaf even at this point in his career, and he finds Raquel, and we talked about Jakob Silfverberg getting the monkey off his back. This is a big game also for Rickard Raquel to get his first of the season and hopefully get going here too. The Ducks are going to need both of them, and these two guys are what you would expect to be the Ducks' top two goal scorers, right? In Silfverberg and Raquel. So both of them kind of getting on the board for the first time in the season in this game is, I think, huge for the Ducks going forward, especially building that confidence and moving into the next game.
Yeah, I think what you see there is a moment of individual brilliance in Ryan Getzlaf's play. And I don't want to sound, I don't want to sound entirely too fanboy, but I mean, those are the types of plays that make Getzlaf a special player. And that's something that we as Anaheim fans have been very spoiled by, over the last 12, 13 years, as far as what he's capable of. He makes that perfect pass, and Raquel's the guy you want there, right? He just gets the shot off, and it beats Grubauer. And I don't know that that's on Grubauer. The two goals that Grubauer gives up, I'm not 100% sure what you want him to do there. And I think that goes to really the kind of looks, like I said earlier, that Anaheim's going to need to generate. Either those great one-time opportunities off of individual moments of brilliance, which, there aren't really a ton of guys on that lineup who are capable of making that play. And then the Silfverberg goal, which is just, you catch a lucky break, you get a shot off, and you see what happens. I think I've definitely been happy to see Getzlaf look as strong as he has this year. I know it's still early, but I really kind of have been surprised by how good he's looked early, not from a skill perspective, but from a physical perspective. He's still the slowest guy on the ice, but, he's picking his angles a little bit better. He's finishing his checks. He's, he's really engaged, and I think seeing him be engaged all across the ice is one of the things that bodes well for Anaheim, because we know he's always going to be looking for that next level pass like that to try and get an opportunity for somebody. So, I think as much as it was great for Raquel to get his goal, I think it's a great sign that Getzlaf is still, making those passes and reading the game that way, and having someone like Raquel who hopefully can kind of find his footing here is very promising.
Yeah, and I think that the important thing too is when we looked at Corey Perry and kind of his decline and when his legs went. I mean, the speed was really never a huge part of Corey Perry's game, but when his legs really went, his game went out the window. And I think, Ryan Getzlaf, like you said, he's, not anywhere near the fastest player on the ice, but he's still having a significant impact despite that. He's not letting that lack of speed hurt him and hurt, his team play and hurt his game by any means. I mean, he looks as good as he has over the last couple seasons here through the first 6 games, and that's what the Ducks need. He's reworked his game and he's changed it up a bit where he's kind of playing a bit more of a 2C, 3C role where he's being a physical player, and obviously he has that ability to make those plays and make those passes, so he's going to pick up points every now and then. But I think, as a good captain, he has taken on a new role for this team, and he's doing it to the best of his ability, and I think that's all you can ask for, if you're Dallas Eakins and the coaching staff, is that Ryan Getzlaf on a nightly basis is going to put in a shift and he's going to get things done. And when he has the puck on his stick, like tonight, he's going to make things happen. And I think that's a big positive for the Ducks going forward. Obviously, Ryan Getzlaf's contract expires at the end of this season, but if he can continue to play like this across 56 games, I think the Ducks are going to re-sign him no matter what. But I think they're a bit more comfortable about bringing him back, knowing that he can still have an impact and have a successful season despite being on the wrong side of 30 right now.
Yeah, I think the point you made about the legs going with him and Perry is really interesting, right? Because I think the thing about Perry is Perry needs his legs to get to his spots to score goals. And that's not what Getzlaf needs. Getzlaf doesn't move quickly. He's very sudden with his passes or his shooting. But more than anything, he uses his frames to kind of box guys out and keep them on his back and create space that way. His skating is important in so much as everyone needs to know how to skate to play hockey. But I think, I don't think his speed has ever been a huge issue because he sees the game so well and because he tends to play below the face-off dots, and kind of let his guys come to him and try to find and create alleys and open spaces for them to get onto. I think having a guy like Jones on his line who just works is great. And then I think having Raquel, who we know is a capable finisher when he's kind of finding his groove, I think that can definitely be a positive thing for Anaheim going forward.
Yeah, and we move into the third period here, and this is where we knew Colorado was going to make a push, and they made a push here in the third period, and it's a late one, but McKinnon's shot isn't handled by Gibson. Probably the only mistake, if you want to call it that he made all game, where he kind of just fumbles the rebound a bit, and Mikko Rantanen isn't picked up, and he's probably the last guy on the ice that you don't want to have left open in front of the net, and he ends up burying the rebound to cut the lead to 2-1, but ultimately the Ducks get out of this thanks to John Gibson and an empty net goal from Hampus Lindholm. Seal a 3-1 win over the Avs. Like I said at the beginning of the show, 3 points out of a possible 4 from the 2-game stint against Colorado. The Ducks record now sits at 2-2-2. I can't remember what we made some predictions at the beginning of the year in our season preview of how the Ducks would start. I think in their first 10 games, I think it was, and I think I had them at maybe 5 wins. I think you might have had them at, was it 4 wins?
I had them at 4 wins. Yeah.
Through 6 they've got 2, and they've got some easier matchups, if you want to call that. I think they got Arizona coming up next, which is not an easy matchup by any means, but on paper, it's a lot easier matchup than it is going against Colorado and Nathan McKinnon. So there's winnable games coming up, and I think if you had told me through the first 6 the Ducks are 2-2-2. I think I would take that. I think that's a pretty good start to the season for them.
Yeah, I definitely think you're fine with that. like you said, that McKinnon goal, I don't think that's Gibby's fault at all. I think that's a little bit of a breakdown in coverage. And, Ratnan's on his own and he makes a play, and that's just simple as that. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, like, great players make great plays, and that's pretty much what that was. And, he's a big, strong guy around the net, and he's able to get there, and there's no one around. So it doesn't even matter that he's, a bigger guy as far as being around the net. But, that's the kind of stuff I think that's a little bit frustrating and simultaneously inevitable. And I feel like, those are kind of the moments that kind of help keep you grounded in a game like this, where you go, oh yeah, they're still capable of breakdowns like that. And when they're playing elite teams, they're going to make them pay like that. But that Lindholm empty netter was great to see. Like you said, he goes right to Gibby and he goes, thanks for saving our ass tonight. And so, yeah, I think that's, I think that third period showed you a little bit more of what you're expecting the game to look like, as far as them getting kind of run around a little bit. I think the thing for me that really kind of left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth was that power play. I didn't like seeing them basically just try to kill 2 minutes with a man advantage. I would have liked to see them be a little bit more aggressive. I think putting Lindholm out there, while understandable, is a mistake, because if for no other reason, I don't know that you want him on the ice any more than he has to be. And a power play is one of the times where you can, justifiably take him off the ice and know there are better options. I think to see them really just kind of pack it in for 2 minutes was really disconcerting, and especially for a team that I think still doesn't have a power play goal. Like, you'd like to see them just, it's not like they don't need the reps. You know what I mean? It isn't like they're clicking at 30% and they know that they've got it. This is a team that desperately needs power play help, and I think not taking every opportunity in real games to score power play goals is pretty brutal. So I think that for me did leave a sour taste in my mouth. Oh my God, sour taste in my mouth. But, at the end of the day, they won the game, and that's really all you can ask for. They made enough mistakes to keep it fun and interesting, but they didn't make so many that they gave it away.
Yeah, I think you look at that third period is, John Gibson made about 3 game-saving stops, but other than that, I think the Ducks did not a great job, but an okay job of closing out the game. They didn't give up, they didn't make any bad turnovers. They didn't give up any really, really bad chances because of poor defensive coverage. I think it was, a hard-fought closeout to the third period, and at some point we knew that McKinnon and Rantanen were going to break through. As good as John Gibson was, those two are just, some of the top players in this league, and they're not going to go down easy. But, the one thing I do agree with you is that power play. I think the problem with me is it's not so much they were kind of killing the clock, because I think that's part of it. It's almost like they are now afraid they're going to give up a shorthanded goal at this point. They kind of play, and that's every power play they have. There's almost this fear that if they overcommit and they try and be too creative, that it's going to result in an odd man rush the other way, and the puck's going to be in the back of their net. And we've seen some shorthanded goals against so far this season. We've seen some great shorthanded saves by John Gibson and Ryan Miller so far this year, and that's not how you want to run a power play. You don't want to go out there afraid that you're going to concede. That's not the point of a power play. The point is you have a man advantage. You're going out there to put your team in a good position and put the puck in the back of the net. And, the Ducks power play is never going to get better if they're all going out there with that fear that they could concede shorthanded. At that point, no matter what system you have set up, no matter what personnel you have out there, it's never going to change if that mentality is in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, I don't think, the power play is a place where you want your guys feeling timid, especially with a team that's going to so noticeably and predictably struggle to score goals this year. I don't think you want to be timid. I don't think you want your players being timid. And I'm, frankly, I don't know that this isn't one of the things that I look at Aikens as being in charge of. You know what I mean? I think for me, it's definitely one of those things where it's like, dude, you're the coach. They're going to take away the lessons you want them to take away from. And if, the end of a third period, you're more it's more important for you that you not give up a shorty, like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I just don't think that's, especially this early in the season, I don't really think you want to be sending that kind of message to your players, especially when we know that the power play is going to need to see significant improvement. I don't know that it's a great idea to undermine your players' confidence so quickly.
Yeah, and you know what? We might as well move on to the post-game topics now. And we discussed this yesterday. I guess it would have been yesterday on Pucks and Brews on our Patreon, where we talked about the resolution to the Pierre-Luc Dubois saga. This will be the first time we're covering it live on the regular show here. But as you know, and I'm sure as you're all aware at this point, the Ducks were one of 3 finalists to work out a trade for Pierre-Luc Dubois. It was Winnipeg, Montreal, and Anaheim who were really in the mix. Ultimately, it's the Jets who come out the winners of the Pierre-Luc Dubois sweepstakes. They send Patrik Laine and Jack Roslovic, who's a Columbus native, to the Blue Jackets for Pierre-Luc Dubois and a 3rd-round pick. You know what? It's disappointing. I mean, we, unoptimistically or pessimistically called this on the last show, where we said, the Ducks always kind of get down to the wire with some of these trades, but they never get it done. You look at 3 really in the last year here where they got close to Justin Falk. They didn't get him. He ended up going to St. Louis, which maybe was a blessing in disguise, but still, they got down to the wire on a trade and they couldn't pull the trigger. They explored Kasperi Kapanen, were one of the finalists on that one. Ultimately didn't get that deal done. The price for him was pretty high, so again, maybe a blessing in disguise. And then here with Pierre-Luc Dubois, one of 3 finalists, and you just can't compete with that offer. Winnipeg is looking to trade Patrik Laine. He's a superstar in this league. The Ducks, I think, value-wise, could put up a pretty similar deal, with Raquel, Steele, and a 1st-round pick. I think the 1st-round pick offsets maybe the difference in Patrik Laine over Raquel and Steele, but you're not getting that superstar. And I think that's what Columbus wanted at the end of the day, was if they're going to get rid of a superstar, they want one in return.
Yeah, and, full credit to Columbus. Like, you look at that roster and you look at that team and, the first question you have to ask yourself is, how are they going to score goals? Well, a big part of that was Pierre-Luc Dubois. And, even he wasn't a 30-goal scorer on that team. So now if they're going to move out from one of their best guys, like, they got to get something back. And I think, we had talked about it in so much as Laine as a talent thing being something that the Ducks just couldn't match, and it was going to be about contract extensions and personality fit. And, obviously they felt comfortable with all of that, and so they made the deal. I think the Justin Falk one is a blessing in disguise. I think the Kapanen one, as far as, they wanted the Drysdale pick, which wasn't going to happen. And, Kapanen he's not that quality a player. I think you can say that both of those are definitely ones where it might be better that the Ducks didn't get that trade, but I do think it's interesting that the Ducks seem to so clearly be in buying mode. I don't think we've heard about a fallen trade that's them selling.
Yeah, we've never really heard, like, we haven't heard what was involved in this Dubois trade. I mean, it's heavily speculated that Raquel probably would have been part of it, because it just makes sense in terms of, his contract, the term he has left, and his ability as a player. But yeah, you don't really hear things on the other side where, the Ducks were trying to move Lindholm and it just didn't work, or a deal fell apart, or the offer wasn't that high. The Ducks always seem to be in on trying to buy players, and it's a mix too. That's the weird thing is, sometimes like Dubois and Kapanen, it's young players who have some term and could be, an asset to your team now and in the future. And then with the Falk deal, it's, it was before Shattenkirk got signed, so I know there was a need for a right shot defenseman, but you're getting a guy who's, north of 30, coming in at a long term with a big value on his contract. It's, it's a mixed bag from Bob Marin. We heard in the preseason and his comments where he said this is a win now team, which I think a lot of us kind of laughed at and said there's no way, this is a win now team the way they're structured.
Right.
But when you look at him going out there and being in on some of these deals and trying to be a buyer, there is a win now aspect to that type of behavior from Bob Murray. And again, like I said, I mean, the Kasperi Kapanen, the Justin Falk deals may be blessings in disguise, but it becomes a trend with Anaheim that we've seen over the last few years now that they kind of get down to a wire on a lot of these deals, but none of them get closed.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the most notable points of differentiation between Brian Burke and Bob Murray. Brian Burke was, all right, well, we're going to have this conversation until you agree to give me what I want, and we're going to figure out what has to be in this. Bob Murray seems to be much more of, well, maybe I will, maybe I won't, and I don't know if I want to do that, and, heaving and hoeing and not really putting it over the line. We talked about it this weekend. They missed on Pacioretty because they didn't want to put Steele in the deal, and it's hard to look at that and not think that wouldn't have been a clear win for the Ducks. As much as they do need center depth, I think they need goals more, and it would have been nice to have goals when Getzlaf was still closer to 30 than 40. I think it's an interesting thing to look at, as far as what happens now, right, and what this means and what kind of things we can learn from it. I think, we kind of talked about this a little bit before the show, and it's, what is the fallout for this? How does this affect the locker room? How does this affect the plans? What do you think about that? Do you think this gives us any insight into what we can expect the rest of the year? Or
yeah, it's such an interesting situation because, do I think the Ducks are buyers strictly because they are in on Pierre-Luc Dubois? I don't think that means now they're going to shift their focus to somebody else who's available. Right. I think this was a unique situation that you don't have a player of this caliber and this potential become available that often. And you looked at the responses when this first came out. There was 25 teams or so that were interested, and then eventually it came down to 3 or 4 who had strong offers, and the Ducks were a part of it. I really don't know where this goes from here. I think it shows the Ducks are willing to trade players if a deal makes sense, if it's a player they really want. So I think like every year, Bob Murray's always going to be looking for that opportunity to become available. But I don't think it necessarily means the Ducks are going to be pushing for a trade because they missed out on Pierre-Luc Dubois. Now they're going to go pursue a secondary option, or they had, other options that if they missed out on Dubois, this is their target. I don't necessarily think that's the direction they're going to go. I think this was a unique opportunity that they had to be involved in. They threw their hat in the ring, and it just so happened that, their offer was one of the top 3 offers that Columbus was considering. But, it's a tough one. And we got a question in the chat that said, is this a knock on Murray that he can't swing these trades? And it's really hard to judge that because, we don't know what he was offering, and we don't know what he was not willing to offer. And you really don't hear much after these trades don't happen. And at the end of the day, only one GM is going to get this done. Habs fans, I'm sure, are upset that they couldn't swing this deal. But for them, it was rumored that Nick Suzuki wanted to be, that Columbus wanted Nick Suzuki to be a part of that. And I think if you're Montreal, you're probably happy with the way Nick Suzuki's playing right now, and then that deal didn't go through. And for us, if it meant Trevor Zegras is involved, I think the majority of Ducks fans right now would be happy that deal didn't go through if it was going to include Trevor Zegras. I don't want to speculate, but I'm sure if the Ducks landed Pierre-Luc Dubois and it meant giving up Trevor Zegras, that would not sit well with the fan base. You're getting an exceptional player in Pierre-Luc Dubois, but for a lot of people, that potential of what Zegras could hold, I think, you'd be getting bad flashbacks of losing Shea Theodore. And I know it's not a similar situation, but that's what you get is, when you're trading a prospect like that, you're like, oh man, what if this guy turns out to be the real deal? And, I think, again, the Ducks clearly weren't willing to move those guys. And at the end of the day, man, it's so hard to beat that offer. I mean, Patrick Laine is an exceptional player, and he fits exactly what Columbus was looking for. So I give Bob Murray credit for getting down to the wire and at least producing a strong enough offer that he was one of those remaining teams. I would just love to know what that was and what he's willing to kind of trade to get a player like that.
Yeah, and I think to a degree, the one thing that happened here that fell into Winnipeg's lap is that they also had a clear top line talent who didn't want to be there anymore. So they weren't trading away a promising young forward that they had hoped to be part of the team for 10 years. They were trading a guy who had explicitly told them he didn't want to be there anymore and had been in the rumor mill for, God, what is this, the third year of
Yeah.
him, being rumored to be on the block. And I do think that gives them a huge advantage. And, like you said, like there's really no way to know for sure until you hear whatever the real offers were and what the sticking points were. But I'll say as someone, as a basketball fan, like you always hear about the Boston Bruins or sorry, the Boston Celtics being in all these trades for all these guys and never getting it. They were in on Paul George and didn't get him. They were in on Kawhi and didn't get him. They were in on Jimmy Butler and didn't get him. And like it's kind of okay for them because they've got such great young talent, but at a certain point I do think it becomes an issue that you're always the bridesmaid and never the bride on these kinds of deals. So I think it's definitely something that, as far as like, is it a knock on him? I definitely think it's concerning, and I do think at a certain point it becomes an issue. But I also do think it's encouraging to know that Bob Murray is sticking his foot in the water a little bit and trying to see what he can do to help improve the team.
Yeah, and I think it's disappointing for Anaheim because it is such a unique situation. It just so happens that, players like Patrick Laine don't become available that often, if ever. A player who scores 30-plus in his first 3 seasons and probably could have hit 4 if he had played a few more games last year before the season got shut down. 4 straight 30-plus goal seasons to start your career, that's rare territory. That's one of the top finishers in this league. The only reason he was available is because he asked for a trade out of Winnipeg. And, if that doesn't happen, does Anaheim get this deal done? We'll never know if they were, second best offer or if they're in front of Montreal's offer or what. But it's just, it's kind of an unlucky situation at that point that, that it just so happens that this player was available and this deal makes sense for both teams. And, if you're Winnipeg, you've got a 30-plus goal scorer with 40-plus potential, and Kyle Connor already. Mark Scheifele can hit 25 to 30. Blake Wheeler has that potential. Nick Ehlers can be 20-plus. So as good as Patrick Laine is, he's almost surplus to requirements on that team. And then, you can bring in a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois. Maybe you lose out on the 10 extra goals that you get from Patrick Laine, but you get a little bit more of a responsible center who can now give you a 1-2 punch of Scheifele and Dubois, and you can move Stastny down to that third line, and all of a sudden you've got maybe the best center depth in terms of the top 3 lines in that entire division, and
absolutely,
and you're up there in terms of league center depth when you get to that point as well. I mean, those are 3 guys that I think any team would love to have, and especially Scheifele and Dubois. So it's just one of those unique situations at that point where I think this one is hard to knock Bob Murray on because it's so impossible really to beat that offer and kind of that situation, right? So it's a tough one.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to look at a way to be critical of Bob Murray in this sense, I think the one thing that you could look at is say that this is a 3 degrees removed result of him maybe not being as aggressive, selling off older players, trading away older players over the last couple years. You got to wonder, if Anaheim has a couple extra picks and a couple extra prospects, I mean, how much different does it look if we don't only really have 2 first-round picks, 2 high first-round picks over the last couple years? I think if it's not Zegras or bust, I think maybe you can look at it and go, oh, well, they got this guy they drafted 12th 2 years ago, or they got this guy, or, maybe they have a couple extra picks. And then on top of that, you can use that to sweeten the deal and give, Columbus the more win now assets that they need, while also helping, recoup the fact that they are trading away a 22-year-old number 1 center. So I think it would be definitely be fair to look at Bob Murray's failure to, accurately assess the quality of the roster and to not have accrued more picks and prospects over the last couple years, because we've talked about it before. Like the big benefit of having picks and prospects is you can either trade them for players or you can just take players, and having both options or being able to do both things is huge. So, I think if you wanted to knock Bob Murray for one thing, I think that's certainly a fair way to look at it and to be critical of him from that extent. But I don't know how you necessarily feel about that. But
Yeah, for me, it'd be interesting to see the direction the Ducks take at this point. I mean, like we said, the Dubois situation is a bit of a unique situation, and it doesn't necessarily mean the Ducks are buyers at this point in time. But sitting at 2-2-2, a win now mentality from Bob Murray, I think it'll be really interesting to see what their record is come when you get a little bit closer to trade deadline, and what direction the Ducks take this year. I think a lot of us would assume that they're sellers, and they probably should be sellers no matter what position they are in, to kind of accelerate this rebuild and add to the top prospects you have already in Zegras and Drysdale. But I really don't know which direction Bob Murray is going to take this in, because I think he would hope that if the Ducks are in that playoff hunt at that spot and within a few points or sitting in that fourth spot at that point in time, he might consider them buyers. And that's not necessarily going out and getting a rental and giving up prospects or picks to get that rental, but maybe that's when you explore another trade to get a younger player with term that can help you this year and help you for that playoff push, but also still be a part of this kind of rebuild and this transition to the future. So I'm really interested to see which way he takes it. I mean, obviously, as it always is, it's a lot on performance and how the Ducks are doing at that point in time. But there really is no clear direction at this point. You can make an argument for the Ducks being buyers or sellers.
I think it's a little harder to make the buying argument unless you are, talking about 23, 24 years old and younger. I think really the only thing that would make me kind of okay with some level of, going out and being a buyer on the market, I think, is if Zegras comes up and is an impact player kind of right away. If he comes up and all of a sudden you've got someone who can be a difference maker, who can be dynamic on the ice, who really gives you that that extra bit of creativity and offense, then maybe it's a different situation, right? But looking at the roster as of now, like, I don't know where you see the upside on this roster that says I should start going out and getting guys in their, mid to late 20s, let alone guys in their 30s. So I think for me, it's much easier to make the argument for the Ducks being a seller, but I think you're absolutely right. There's no way for us to know what Bob Murray is going to do because, he seems to be walking the line. He hasn't seemed to want to commit to a direction at all, ever. So
yeah, I think that's an important part of it is, I mean, if Trevor Zegras comes in and steals a roster spot, he essentially eliminates somebody from a spot that they have at this point in time. And not everybody can go onto that taxi squad freely without either having to pass through waivers at that point. And, I think that could lead to a point where if he does come up and plays exceptionally well and earns that spot, that the Ducks are kind of forced into making a move. And that's not a bad thing. When we say they're forced into making a move, that's making a move because Zegras has come in and been so good. And now you can move
right.
Another asset out to help somewhere else. So I think at the end of the day, I mean, we talked about this in our season preview that a few of these guys are gone come trade deadline, or at least at the draft or at some point. I think you've got so many young players pushing for roster spots right now, and you're kind of in that middle part of this rebuild right now where you're trying to stock up on as many top prospects as you can to add to a really top end talent pool that starts with Zegras and Drysdale. So we'll see. It's interesting. I think, with an AHL season and the schedule set now, we kind of know when we're going to see Zegras. We have a little bit of a timeline for, how many games he can get under his belt in the AHL, and maybe project that to when he could get into the lineup for the Ducks. And, again, a lot of that is based on his production and barring any injuries that Anaheim might have. But you can start to build out a timeline of how this season might play out and when potential moves might be made, depending on how well he does. So it'll be interesting to see, because I think, other than Zegras, there are some talented players down in San Diego, some young players who could also push for a roster spot if they're playing well. So I think when you look at guys like Terry and Raquel and, Max Jones and Maxime Comtois, I think, they have to play well if they want to keep their roster spot. I don't think anybody's roster spot is really safe at this point, and I'm sure Bob Murray has made that clear. We've heard that in comments from him. Like, there's really nobody untouchable on this team at this point in time, and that level of competitiveness is going to show.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, it's pretty much Gibby and Lindholm, and that's about it as far as everybody who's locked in. But I think it's definitely fair to, like, I don't want to undersell like some of the Sam Colangelos or Braden Tracy's or Jacob Perreaults and, even Lakem or my beloved young man, Hunter Drew. Like, I think, there's definitely some optimism in the system as far as if guys kind of hit their stride. But I think what you can see is a lack of assumed high-end talent, right? Like, there's always going to be third and fourth round guys that come good. What you want is to get a little bit better higher up. You know what I mean? I don't think the Ducks feel like they have guys who are going to be guaranteed top six outside of maybe Perreault is the last guy drafted that you look at being that way. As far as just having that kind of elite release. So yeah, I think you're right. I don't think really anybody, maybe Steele is the one who's going to get the longest leash out of the three of them. But I definitely think Jones and Terry are on somewhat of a short leash as far as needing to fulfill the expectation and role that this team has of them, whatever that may be. And if they're able to do that, great. But if not, they could be, in trades. I mean, we saw it last year with Kasha and Richie, who weren't old by any stretch of the imagination. And it was just like, yeah, no, this is what we need to do to move on. So, I think you're right. I don't think anybody in the roster's really got a set spot. And I think, I mean, it's silly to say, but like the next 50 games are going to be pretty crucial as far as what everything looks like this time next year.
Yeah, and I think that transitions perfectly into our fan questions tonight. We got a question from Dave that is revolving kind of around trades and some of the players you just mentioned. He said, Terry had another tough night tonight. How many tough games before he is either on the taxi squad or, at risk of being shipped out to another team?
I think the truth is it's probably not as much. It's probably more games than we would think. I think Milano being on IR really affects that. I think if Milano was healthy, I think we could probably expect to see him on the bench for 2 or 3 games this week. But without there really being anybody else who can provide a level of dynamic offensive, talent, and I don't think Terry's like, a high-end guy, but I think he's definitely got a little bit more offense in his game than some of the other guys, and he's definitely got more offense in his game than Backes. I don't know who else is in the waiting that you bring up. So I do think by a good stroke of luck, Terry's got a bit of time now to kind of find his footing and figure it out.
Yeah, and for me, I don't necessarily think you have to trade him at this point. I don't think the Ducks, even with bad performances, would be pressured into trading him. I think the first scenario is a little bit more likely that he might get a few games on the taxi squad and essentially be healthy scratched so that, it can make a point here. I believe, and I'd have to double check with Terry's new contract, I think he has to pass through waivers now. I don't think he's waiver exempt anymore, so that creates a little bit of a interesting situation if that's the case. But yeah, I think the Ducks would not be pressured into trading him at this point. I mean, if there was interest in him, I think they're listening, but it's not one of those situations where you're actively searching to move this guy out and sell low on him, because I think the Ducks, I mean, clearly the Ducks still value him, and they're playing him on a nightly basis, and even through the struggles, he really hasn't lost his spot through the first 6 games here. So there is some optimism among the Ducks coaching staff and management that they think this guy is going to figure it out, and they like what he brings to the lineup on a nightly basis. So, I don't think there's necessarily a short leash for Troy Terry, but he is one of those guys that, like you said, if the production isn't there, that the Ducks are listening, and if there is a team interested, I think that's where we really start to see things develop. I don't think it's a situation where the Ducks are alerting the other GMs in the league saying, hey, this guy's available, he's not playing right now, come get him.
Right, yeah. No, I definitely think you're right. I think most likely, for me, I do think he is a second name in a trade. But I definitely, I don't think they're moving him out for a second round pick, but I definitely think if it's someone and Terry for a player that the Ducks want, I definitely think that can happen. So yeah, I think, but kind of like I said a minute ago, like I do think that a big boost to him is how limited in forward talent the Ducks are right now. And I do think, they wanted to send him down at the end of last season to try to lead the charge in San Diego and be a big part of that group leading the team through the playoffs. So they definitely expect big things from him to some degree. So I am curious to see where the line is for when they feel like they have to sit him down.
Yeah, and we'll see. And honestly, I'd imagine that they go into Tuesday's game with probably the same lineup as tonight, maybe one change if any. But at this point, I mean, why fix what's not broken? The Ducks have looked good in their last two games. They're probably their best two games of the season so far, where they've played a pretty complete game. Despite, again, being outshot 33-14 is never good, and a lot of this was.
You don't say.
Yeah, a lot of this was on John Gibson tonight. But the Ducks they have played, some pretty good games this year against a tough opponent. But we're gonna wrap up the show here. We'll be back on Tuesday. It's a 9 p.m. start against the Arizona Coyotes. It's a road game. So we'll be live 15 to 20 minutes after that game. And then we'll also be live after the Arizona Coyotes game on Thursday, which starts at the same time. And then we wrap up that week with a back-to-back Saturday-Sunday matchup. So we will be seeing Ryan Miller against the St. Louis Blues. So 4 games in the next, I guess it'll be 4 games in 6 nights because the Ducks have Monday off. So that's going to be a tough stretch. Arizona is probably the easiest matchup of the two, but it's going to be an interesting week for the Ducks. Arizona is going to be one of those teams that we expect to be fighting with for that 4th and final playoff spot, and St. Louis is one of the premier teams of this division. So it's a tough week for the Ducks ahead.
All right, here it is, Eddie. I got a question for you. How many total goals do you think the Ducks score over the next 4 games?
I'd have to think, because I don't have any confidence in St. Louis's backup. So I think that game you're gonna pick up a few in that one.
But you're a big Jordan Binnington fan?
I'm not a Jordan Binnington fan, but I am a fan of the way St. Louis plays in front of Jordan Binnington. So you're saying total goals over the entire week here?
Yeah, so the 2 Arizona games and the 2 St. Louis games.
I'm going to go with 9. I was going to go with 7, but I'll give it a little bit of upside here. I'll go with 9.
I'm going to go with 5.
How many points? How many points do they pick up, Craig? 8 possible points that they could pick up. How many do you think they walk away with here?
I think they get 4 points on 2 overtimes.
2 overtimes?
I think you're looking at 1 win, 1 straight up loss, and 2 overtime losses.
1-1. So 1-1 and 2 across the next. You know what? I'll take that. I was gonna say I'll say they go. I think they go 1, 2, and 1. They pick up 3 points of a possible 8. I think they might squeak out a point in one of the St. Louis games, pick up a win in one of the Arizona games, but ultimately I think they drop some close ones in regulation in the other 2 against Arizona and St. Louis. But either way, we will be there after each of the games, except for the weekend game. Since it's a back-to-back, we won't be live on Saturday night after the Blues game. We'll be live on Sunday to cover both of the games, because a back-to-back post-game show on Saturday and Sunday would be rough. So we'll have 3 shows for the upcoming week here. I'll close it with this. We are doing a little bit of a giveaway right now. If you guys do want to head to Apple Podcasts, if you enjoy the show and want to hit us with a review, we'll be picking one of our favorite reviews over the next little bit here and giving away a Forever Mighty prize pack to one of our friendly and kind Apple Podcast reviewers. So, we always love the feedback. It helps the show. It helps the show get out there. So if you guys do want to go drop us a review on Apple Podcasts, we appreciate that. And it is kind of part of the giveaway we're doing right now. So anyway, with that, we'll wrap the show. You'll see one of the four of us on Tuesday, whether it be me or Steven or Pat and Jay. And we look forward to talking to you guys then. Thanks for coming out, guys.
Later, everybody.